Thank you, Eddie. Thank you very much for hosting this summit. And congratulations on the election result, and indeed on this European path and this confidence in the future in Europe that you expressed. Thank you, and I am happy to see everyone here again for the 6th summit of the European political community and the first in the Balkan region. And so, thank you for the immense hospitality and also for reminding us that behind the European dream and what unites us, Europe is not simply a geography, but it is always a mythology, a story, and a journey, and to remind us that this Europe of the Renaissance, of enlightenment, of peace, progress, and culture is the one that has inspired us and which deep down inspires us. Nevertheless, we find ourselves at a moment in the life of our nations and of this region which, I believe, imbues today's meeting with a certain gravity, given the challenges we face. And in trying to prepare for this meeting, I was struck by the extent to which, and in a probably unprecedented way, we are facing a challenge in our Europe today, in all its security aspects. And bringing together this broad Europe, beyond the European Union, bringing together as equals all the heads of state and government, and all the nations represented here, is an attempt to give our great continent a chance to face its challenges through unity. And I think that unity among us all is essential today, given the threats and risks of division that weigh on the continent. Obviously, the first security is geopolitical security, as you both expressed, and the threats of war and division that strike Europe and sometimes threaten its own unity. First, obviously, is the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine. Volodymyr knows how much we support him here. And I think that the battle we are all waging, that we waged collectively last week with Keir, Donald, and Friedrich, the coalition of the willing that has been formed and unites many here around this table to support Ukraine, is important first of all to obtain a ceasefire. And if necessary, I believe that the last few hours have shown in this regard that Russia does not want a ceasefire, and that there is no increased pressure from the Europeans and the Americans to obtain this result. It will not be spontaneous. And ultimately, Russia wants to resume the well-known talks held between February and May 2022. Which failed to prevent war crimes in Bucha and elsewhere, and which yielded no results. We must push forward on this path and build a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. This is also the work that is currently being finalized. I hope it will be completed and that it will lead to a peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I really want to express here to Nicole and Ilham our full support for all of us in achieving the signing of this peace treaty along this path. This is about making progress on the issues that remain between Belgrade and Pristina. It's about supporting Moldova, a daily victim of Russian interference. And it's about recalling the importance of the ongoing elections, which, as we well know, are also subject to such interference. And finally, as Antonio just said, it's about coordinating together to respond to the unacceptable humanitarian situation in Gaza. Obtaining an immediate ceasefire, a humanitarian response, and then a political response is the only way to achieve a path that is key to the unity of our countries and the principles we defend, but which is also the only way, in view of the rest of the world, to be understood about what we are doing in Ukraine. And I am not comparing any situation, but I want to insist on this for all of us. The bulk of humanity, China, India, the African continent, the Near Middle East, the Pacific, Asia, and Latin America are watching us. Sometimes they don't fully understand what we're doing in Ukraine. Let's be clear about that. But we have to accept it and explain it. But they no longer understand us at all about Ukraine when we remain silent on Gaza. What they tell us is strange. You tell us that our lives are at stake when territorial sovereignty is under attack, then you turn a blind eye when there is a massacre. And I'm not comparing anything. I know the stories, but I really want to wake us up collectively here to the consistency we must maintain on these points. Deep down, we see it. All these situations demonstrate the need for peace and the obvious need to return to it through diplomacy. But this is the path on which we must find unity for our security and on which we must also build a collective response. and behind it, to be credible, here too we must have a common response. A large majority of us are part of NATO, but we also need to have a strong European pillar within NATO and to act as Europeans for our collective security. And the last few weeks and months have shown this. And Europe, a broad Europe, is gaining even more strength and relevance in the moment we are living in, precisely to ensure its own security. The European political community is also the space that allows us to build security for our populations. And in this regard, the fight against drug trafficking, narcotics trafficking, and the fight against illegal immigration are essential issues that we have begun to discuss together, and on which I hope that together we can begin to structure coalitions of states, international organizations, and specialized European agencies to combat trafficking, particularly port and river trafficking, and to build data exchanges, combat illicit financing, money laundering, and corruption, and strengthen prevention programs. This is a key battle, one that our populations are eagerly awaiting. All these forms of trafficking are interlinked, and the European political community is also the space that allows for the building of very concrete cooperation in this area. The third element is democratic security. Alain has been waiting for this in all his speeches and through his organization. But we see through our elections, Romania is experiencing it right now. As I mentioned, Moldova experienced it very recently. We very clearly have threats that undermine the integrity of our democracies, that undermine their resilience. And we experience manipulation during election periods, but also foreign informational interference almost all the time. And this is something that undermines the democratic security of our Europe. And so, faced with this, and these famous fimises, we launched in Blenheim the initiative that was carried out with Maya Sandu, by creating a network of contact points at the CPE level to improve cooperation between us. And we must go further, by better protecting our critical infrastructures against cyber attacks, by strengthening our regulatory frameworks on illegal online content, by tracking the financial flows that fuel these hybrid actions. But this democratic security is essential. Otherwise, especially Russia, we will continue to destabilize our public opinion to move the lines. The European Commission, I know, has initiatives underway. But what Maya brought up in Blenheim, I think, is an important point on which we can tie everything together. And the last point is economic security. I mentioned it in Budapest, but I think we haven't yet sufficiently appreciated the fact that we constitute a market of 700 million inhabitants. And this market has extraordinary power. It is much larger than the American market. It is much more coherent, and in fact, given the average standard of living, it is more structuring than the Chinese market. If we all know how to act together, it's a huge firepower. First, by strengthening cooperation, by breaking down tariff barriers, by having regulatory convergence, to make our greater Europe, our broad Europe, something much more united in terms of trade and economic integration. These are all the debates that we have between the European Union and the United Kingdom, and that are being conducted at the moment. But they are also the debates that we had and that you had structured, in particular, Alexandre and Eddie, on the entire region. I hope that we can really go much further in this economic integration of the region, independently of the issues of enlargement in the European Union. And I think that we must coordinate very closely to face all external attacks, or, basically, anything that creates unfair competition. We are all facing American tariffs. Let's coordinate. We will be much stronger if we coordinate with a market of 700 million inhabitants and consumers. We all face unfair competition from certain products from Asia, due to differences in rules or oversubsidization of overcapacity. Let's coordinate, and we'll be much stronger in protecting our markets and our common good. I hope we'll also try to structure our thinking and work around economic security on a continental scale, and therefore around the European political community. These are the few words I wanted to say, but basically, we can clearly see that our great Europe is at a time of geopolitical awakening. If precisely we want to avoid the abduction and the rebirth, this continues to paint the myths and basically the great risk that Europe runs. Then I do not know if it is Zeus transformed into a bull who will abduct it. What I do know is that the risks are multiplying in front of us, and that the European political community is a space that allows us to structure, on the geopolitical and military level, on the security and safety of our countries, on the economic level, and on the democratic level. Very concrete responses through coalitions of action. And so for that, I think it is time, as was proposed by Victor and like Eddie, to follow up on an effect formalized by a light secretariat, a support coordination team to monitor the concrete projects of the EPC, which could be ensured by the Troika of presidencies and the President of the European Council, and therefore each time to be able to plan for the 2 upcoming presidencies, which would allow us to have permanent troikas and monitoring of the projects that we launch in this framework. In any case, Eddie, thank you for allowing us to meet in Tirana, and thank you for the hospitality and the lyrical love of our Europe that you carry.